We want to thank everybody for joining us and those who will be joining us soon for this week's Bible study entitled The DNA of the Seed of Abraham. And we want to, I'm going to say this here in the beginning, I'm going to say it again towards the middle, that this is part 3 of a 3-part series. We started with the Bible study on Am I a Christian? The second Bible study was on the mystery of physical circumcision, and this is the 3rd part. So if there are some things that may not make sense or they may be fuzzy, towards the end when we open it up for questions and answers, don't take it offensive if we kind of give you a general answer and refer you back to those Bible studies. So this is technically the 3rd part of a 3-part series, and actually 4th part we're going to have next week. No part of this publication may be reproduced or retransmitted without the express written consent of Beyth-el Temple Inc. of Chicago, which is under the leadership of Chief Apostle Dr. Yeho Kanabi Aman. The information that you're about to be presented is not independent of Beyth-el Temple Inc. of Chicago or Dr. Aman, who through revelational research, which includes biblical hermeneutics, has discovered the ancient biblical principles that were once kept by the prophets of old and later by Christ in the New Testament. These same principles were taught to the disciples by the Messiah, who then commanded them to go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. For those that may be joining us here for the first time, our Bible studies are broken up into 2 parts. Part 1 is a lecture. All participants are muted, so you don't have to worry about keeping quiet in the background. Part 2 is when we open it up for our question and answer session. At this time, you'll notice a box here on the side of your blue box where you can see the chat, and above that is attendance. There's a box where you can click on and hit *6. If you're calling via telephone, you can hit *6 on your keypad. So we want to go over some of our objectives, Elder, for tonight, and then we want to continue to remind the individuals that this is a 3rd-part series, so we highly encourage you to go back over the last 2. Our objective is to distinguish Abraham's blessed seed from other descendants of Abraham as the father of many nations. To illustrate how God changed the DNA of the promised seed from the children of Abraham, and finally to show the difference between as well as the implication of old covenant circumcision with respect to new covenant circumcision. And this is a lot of what we covered on last week. But Elder, out of the objectives, can we talk a minute before we move on about this first one? We want to distinguish Abraham's blessed seed from other descendants of Abraham as the father of many nations.
Yes, I'd like to begin by mentioning the latter part of that first statement. Abraham, or at the time he was called Abram, was the father of many nations. That means that many nations rose as a result of coming from his seed. But we want to be careful when we're looking at the seed of Abraham, because everyone that was born through Abraham's loins was not the promised seed, was not the blessed seed. So because he was a father of many nations, we need to be able to understand the Bible's message as to who that blessed seed is and who is entitled to the promises of Abraham. Because today many people claim, I received the blessings of Abraham. Well, and this is designed to show you whether or not you are even entitled to the blessings of Abraham.
Okay. What is so important about the DNA of the seed of Abraham? And this is what we want to talk about and concentrate on this part here on tonight. Every covenant made was between ALL and Yisra'el. In English, it says Israel. It is important to clearly identify who these people are. Today, people claim that they are the elect. We hear a lot of people say that they are the elect. You have a lot of people who claim to be the true Jews or true Yisra'el. And one thing we don't have on here is that there are a lot of people who call themselves Hebrew Israelites. Now, if you know anything about any of these groups, just by saying the Hebrew Israelites alone, you know, there are hundreds of, might be thousands of different groups of Hebrew Israelites, those that believe in various doctrine. And so we need to find out who the true seed of Abraham is, because everybody is making claims to this promised seed. While some emphatically believe that their skin color makes them El's chosen people, others are completely clueless because they believe that they were not born a Jew or Israel. So how then can they partake in all the covenants that were promised to Yisra'el? For this reason, it is important to identify both who are the true people of El and how one is grafted into the family by gene manipulation, becoming the true seed of Abraham. Elder, before I turn it over to you, I think it's important that we look at this thing. We see a lot of people who may be Israelites or Hebrew Israelites, and you see how they focus on, well, my skin is black. Blacks were the original Jews, therefore that makes me a Jew. On the other side of the fence, you have the European Jews who say, well, my ancestors or my grandmother is from Israel, and so I am the true seed of Israel, or the true Jew. And so now we have to really distinguish, how do we know? It's not about skin color, but what we want to talk about, how do you become the true seed of Abraham? Because truly, whether what you say is true, that because your skin is dark that you're the original Jew. Now, I'm not saying that's not the case, but how can you even track yourself or trace yourself back to the original people? You know, there were Egyptians that were dark-skinned. There were other Semitic people who were dark-skinned. So to insinuate that because we are dark, or because I'm white and I'm from the land of Israel, this makes me the true seed of Abraham. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, as far as what we want to prove here today.
Well, what we want to show today, and I think we need to pay very careful attention to it, because it really doesn't matter whether your skin tone is dark, if you're dark complected, or if you are light complected, because we're not talking about a race of people. We're talking about the seed of Abraham, and Abraham was the father of many nations, and that meant that it were people of multiple colors. But the point is that what we're going to find out in this lesson is that there's an obligation for the seed of Abraham. In other words, those that are entitled to the promise are also entitled to something else. They're entitled to show that they're the seed of Abraham by doing something. And so we want to be able to show that through here. Now, today we'll be using a number of terms that I'm sure you've heard before. And if you are not familiar with them, we want to do the best we can to make sure that we clarify them. For example, we're going to be talking about DNA. Okay, you might have learned in school that's deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, now we'll be talking about later on the genotype, the phenotype, and so forth. But listen very carefully so you can get an understanding of what these terms are that we will be using, and what statement it is that we're making about that blessed, that promised seed of Abraham. Because if you're entitled to his promises, you need to know what makes you entitled to those promises.
Okay. And as you said, that there is something that is significant about the seed of Abraham. So you want to make sure that you are the seed of Abraham, because there are some things that the seed of Abraham is going to get that won't be unto you if you're not the seed of Abraham. The Bible is clear in that every covenant of promise, whether it's the new covenant or eternal life, is given only to true Yisra'el. While many people read these Bible verses, they quickly dismiss them due to their lack of understanding concerning these principles. They contend that they are neither a Jew or Yisra'el, and therefore some scriptures are beyond their comprehension. Regardless of their lack of understanding, there's no denying the following Bible verses that we're going to present. Now, I want to say this as clear as I can so that people get an understanding. If you look throughout the Bible, Elder, Old Testament, New Testament, you'll see that every covenant, every promise was made to the, I'm going to say it in English, was made to the children of Israel. So when you begin to minister to people or witness to people, the children of Israel, as we talked about on last week, when they hear Israel, they think of, oh, white European Jews. Oh, my grandmother or mother has to be born in the land. So they dismissed the notion that these covenants of promise was to the children of Israel, because they say, well, I'm not Israel. I wasn't born a Jew. I wasn't born in the land. And so they completely miss, or they don't understand the context of the Bible and the verses that we present, as we did last week, where it says salvation is of the Jew, or all of Israel shall be saved. So we're going to look at some of those Bible verses here tonight. Elder, we have a few Bible verses. If you want to go through those as I bring them up, we can discuss how this relates to our subject.
Isaiah 45:17, it reads, "But Yisra'el," that's Israel in English, "shall be saved in the Yehovah," which is the Lord, with an everlasting salvation. So salvation has been mentioned with respect to Yisrael from the back. 2 Samuel 7:23, it sort of asks the question, "And what one nation in the earth is like thy people?" Now, he didn't leave this a mystery, because he said, even like Yisrael. So Yisrael are the people of El, whom El went to redeem for a people to himself. For thou hast confirmed to thyself thy people Yisrael. I mean, the Bible's taking the time to be redundant to make the point that Yisrael, that's the people of El, to be a people unto thee forever. Now,
Forever.
That means that there's no end to Yisrael being his people. And no matter what you say in the New Testament, we like to go in the New Testament and say, well, it's not Yisrael anymore. All of them died out. That's not what the Bible says. Even in the New Testament, it says that he has not forsaken his people. And thou, Yehovah, are become their El. So he's our El, and we are his people. In Jeremiah 31:31, which we visited on last week, it simply reminds us, it says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Yehovah, that I will make a new covenant," and we like to emphasize a whole lot on the new covenant, "with" who though? "With the house of Yisrael and with the house of Judah." So this scripture, this passage did not say I'm making this covenant with the Christian. Now we know that down through the years, if you looked at the other lesson, the people of El have been described in many different ways. They were called Jews. They were referred to as Hebrew. They were even called, in the New Testament, the Bible said they were first called Christians at Antioch. But regardless to how many different terms were used to describe them, they only had one name. And the Bible is constantly using that name, Yisrael. And John 4:22, again, it makes a connection with salvation. Ye worship, ye know not what. But here's an assurance for those that are Yisrael, who are the Jews. We know what we worship, for salvation is of. That word "of" shows belongingness, is of the Jews.
Okay.
And finally, Romans 11:26, "And so all Yisrael shall be saved, as it is written." So this is just a rehashing of what has already been said somewhere else.
Okay. And before we, even move forward, even if I didn't know what the promises of Abraham was, or what the promise of Abraham or the blessed seed of Abraham is, I can kind of draw the conclusion from a number of Bible verses in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament that is connected to these people that are called by the name of Yisrael. And so, we can even see this start coming together before we even get to this DNA, and before we even get to talking about Abraham. But once again, looking back at the last two Bible studies, because people see these Bible verses, and as you said, Elder, they say, well, all of the children of Israel, they're dead. Or they say, well, I'm not a Jew. So they read this, and many of us, before we came into the knowledge of truth, we read a lot of these Bible verses, and we said, oh, okay, salvation is of the Jews. Oh, okay, all of Yisrael shall be saved. And we didn't understand what it meant. But the Bible is crystal clear that salvation and these promises belong to the children of Yisrael.
That's all right.
The true people of God, of El, were described as Jew, as Hebrew, and as Christian, and this is what we went over last week. However, they were only called by one name, and that was Yisra'el. The Father took them and formed them. Before we go to the Bible verse, Elder, can you talk a little bit about that statement that the Father took these people and he formed them?
Well, basically what we're saying is that the nation of Yisrael were not a people. There was no people that were called Yisrael as a group before El gave them that name. So some people are under the misconception that there were people that were named Yisrael thousands and thousands of years ago, and then El decided to choose them. No. Yisrael is a name that El gave. Now, there were some people that were called Hebrews. Okay. Matter of fact, the Bible tells you that Abraham was a Hebrew. But he gave his people a name. So Yisrael was formed. Those individuals that were his people, he made them his people. He formed them because he gave them statutes, laws, and judgment that they must live by, must abide by, in order to become his people.
Okay. And we're going to see from when he called Abram out from among his people, and he said, I will make of thee a great nation. We're going to see, beginning with Abraham, all the way throughout the Old Testament, and as we even get to the New Testament, we're going to see that El was still forming his people. He was still taking people, and he was still cleaning their heart, and he was still grafting them into the body. So we're going to see, and I think it's important to note, and for some odd reason, when you say the children of Israel or the children of Yisrael, a lot of people just assume that when El created the heavens and the earth, there was a people named the children of Yisrael there. And so now they say, well, no, that can't be, how can I be a part of those people when these people were here from the beginning and the promises were to them? So this is what we want to show today. Elder, we have a couple of Bible verses that shows El formed his people. If you want to go ahead and read Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, verse 9, we can talk about that, and then we have one more Bible verse.
Well, Deuteronomy is a very good example. It reads that the Yehovah, which is the Lord, shall establish thee an holy people. So they were a people already, but they weren't a holy people. Mm-hmm. So, and this is what we mean when we say he formed them. He established them. He set them up as a holy people. He gave them a name. Now, so he established thee a holy people unto himself, as he has sworn unto thee. But there was a condition. If thou shalt keep the commandments of the Yehovah thy El, and walk in his ways. So it was important that his people kept his commandments and did the things that were pleasing in his sight.
Okay. That's that if-then statement. So as we see when they were grafted in, all they had to do to be grafted in was to keep the commandments of El, and they walked in his ways, and this is how they were grafted in the New Testament. If we look at the book of Isaiah, the 43rd chapter, verse 1, we read this Bible verse a lot. It says, but now, thus says the Yehovah that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Yisra'el, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. So when you form something, that means that it wasn't shaped before that.
That's all right.
You took a raw material, or just like the potter here, you took some clay, and you formed the vase, or you formed the bowl. So we see here that he formed the children of Yisrael, and more importantly, he gave them a name. He didn't name them Hebrew Israelite. He didn't name them Israelite. He didn't name them Christian. He didn't name them Jew. He didn't name them Hebrew. He gave them a name. And we see this in Isaiah, the 43rd chapter, verse 1, as well as 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, verse 34.
That's all right.
All Jews were not born Jews. Now, that may sound kind of funny to some people. Many people became Jews through conversion. This means that they not only took on the name of Yisrael, but they were obedient to all of the laws, statutes, and commandments of True Yisra'el. Elder, if you could talk about that statement as we bring up these Bible verses that all Jews were not born Jews. What does that mean?
Well, that means that there was a method, a strategy for bringing people into the fold. And that meant that you didn't have to be born in Israel. You didn't have to be born or have your parents be a Jew in order for you to become a Jew. People became Jews through conversion, and that requirement was to keep his commandments. In Esther, the 8th chapter, and the 17th verse, it gives us an example of that. It says, in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king commandeth, and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews. Well, they weren't Jews in the beginning. So they became Jews. And why did they do it? For the fear of the Jews fell upon them. As the people of AL began to go from one place to the other place, the people of the land saw that AL was with them, and that AL was fighting their battles for them, and many of them converted and became Jews. Okay, we even see in the book of Acts, and you can read that later on. It's about Acts 2 and 6. Talks about Jews and proselyte. A proselyte was just a new convert. So being a Jew was not just something you were born into. And also Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, and the 11th verse, we read this often. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles. Now we're talking about two different things here, and I'm going to emphasize it so you can follow me. We're talking about what you were in the past, and then it continues in red, says that at that time ye were without Christ. So when you're a Gentile, you are without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Yisrael. Why are you without Christ? Because you're not part of Yisrael. And Yisrael are the people of AL. So if you are Gentiles, you are without Christ. So don't stop claiming them. I'm a Gentile saved by grace. No, you are without Christ, being alien from the commonwealth of Yisrael. And guess what? And strangers from the covenants, that's an S on there.
There it is.
Of promise. And you had no hope. And you were without God in the world. Now, this was your past. As long as you claim to being a Gentile, that's your history. But then it says now. So there's something that took place between then and now. You got converted. Now, therefore, ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints. So when we read that word commonwealth, and you might take some time to look it up, a commonwealth is something that shows that people have things in common in a particular citizenry. So these were citizens of Yisrael. Now, so you are no more strangers, you're no more foreigners, but you have become fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of AL. How did you do it? Because you are no more an alien to the commonwealth of Yisrael. You have taken on your heritage, and you have become part of the people of AL.
Okay. Real quick, Elder, that was beautiful. Two Bible verses we have at the bottom, Romans 9 and 6 says, not as though the word of AL hath taken none effect, for they are not all Yisrael which are of Yisrael. So there were a lot of people called Yisrael. Remember, go back to the Bible study from last week and the week before. There were a lot of people that were called Yisrael. There was a false Yisrael, and there was a true Yisrael. And we see that in the Old Testament and in other places where he talks about cursing Yisrael and all these other negative things about Yisrael. So not everybody who called themselves Yisrael were. Acts the 13th chapter, Elder, that you referred to, Acts 13:43 says, now when the congregation was broken up, many of the Jews and religious proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who speaking to them persuaded them to continue in the grace of AL. And Elder, you just gave the definition of what a proselyte was. We also know from the book of John, I believe the 3rd chapter, as Nicodemus was a born Jew. And he asked Christ, what should I do? You know, Christ says, no man can enter into the kingdom of heaven except he be born again. And Nicodemus was a religious leader, a born Jew. And he said, what must I climb back into my mother's womb and be born again? So even when you were a Jew, there was still something that you had to do. all the Jews were not of the promised seed of Abraham. And we're going to show that here in just a bit.
Now, let me just say this before you move on. I'm glad you mentioned that about Nicodemus, because there is a connection between the circumcision and being born again. And that's why what we're explaining to you today is circumcision as it is under the new covenant, and not as opposed to being under the old covenant. So circumcision is a sign. There was a sign of circumcision that was put in the flesh of man, and I'm talking about into its physical circumcised his lower extremities. And then there is another type of circumcision. It's physical as well. But as we said in Jeremiah 31:31, he's going to circumcise, or he's going to write his law on your inward parts. That is in your heart, which is your mind, and in your inward parts. And something takes place when that happens, and we'll go into that later.
Okay. The blessed seed of Abraham. Now we're going to start going into this DNA. The blessed seed of Abraham. When El called Abraham and promised to make of him a great nation, although his initial promise was made with Abraham, the promise was extended unto his descendants, if they would walk before El and be perfect. Was the promise then given unto every of descendants of Abraham, or did it specify a unique group among Abraham's offspring? Elder, can you explain that paragraph? Because we know that there were many nations that came from among Abraham, but we're talking about this promised seed.
Well, that's what this is actually saying, that everybody that was born, that are descendants, natural descendants of Abraham, is not the children of promise. Now, there's no two ways of looking at it. The Bible makes that point very clear in many places. Now, but the key is when you were reading, you got to this part and said, if they would walk before El and be perfect. El required Abraham to walk before him and be perfect. That was extended to his seed. And if they would keep his commandments, and if they will walk before him, he said, I will be your El, and you would be my people. So this was a requirement for Abraham and those of his seed that wanted to be part of the promise.
Okay. And then we have these two Bible verses here, Genesis the 17th chapter, verse 1 and 2. And I'm going to go ahead and read that if you can comment on it, Elder. It says, and when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Jehovah appeared unto Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty El. Walk before me, and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly.
That's all right.
Then we get over to Genesis the 17th chapter, verse 7. It says, and I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee, in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be an El unto thee, and to thy seed after thee.
So basically the same thing is mentioned here, is that El promises that if you would walk after the covenant he gave to Abraham, which was for him to walk before him and be perfect, to keep his commandments, I will be your El, and you will be my people. And we want to be his people, but it's not just in lip service. There's something you have to do. And why do you think he gave commandments? So we can just look at them and admire them?
Right.
No, so we can walk accordingly.
Okay. I mean, here's a question here that, you know, we go back and forth with people in Islam. Wasn't Ishmael the blessed seed of Abraham?
That's all right. It reads Genesis 17th chapter, verses 18 through 19 and verse 21. They emphasize that the promises made to Abraham were extended through Isaac. And the Bible is quite emphatic on that. Mm-hmm. The promise came through Isaac. So it did not come through Ishmael. Now, that didn't put Ishmael out of being having a blessing of his own.
Right.
But he was not part of that promised seed. Now there are some of the children or descendants of Ishmael that may decide to keep the commandments. They would be part of that promise of Abraham because, number one, they came from the seed of Abraham, and two, they kept the covenant. Now, the son of Sarah. Although Abraham had circumcised Ishmael and every male born in his house or bought with his money, Ishmael was not the seed of promise. For like Abraham, the children of promise were required to walk perfect before AL. Even the special appeal of Abraham got to the point where he prayed. He wanted to make sure that there was something done for Ishmael. He thought Ishmael was the one on behalf of Ishmael. And that plea that he made was not enough to qualify Ishmael as El's choice of the seed of promise. And that's in Genesis 17. Why don't you read that for us?
Sure. It says that Abraham said unto El, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." And El said, "Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this time in the next year."
Now, what we have to remember is that when the circumcision was originally given to Abraham, and he circumcised, Ishmael was circumcised as well. But Ishmael was of age by this time. And the covenant required them to be circumcised on the 8th day. So guess what? When Isaac was born, he was circumcised on the 8th day. But Ishmael and the servants were not. And for that matter, not even Abraham was circumcised on the 8th day because he was of age. But the promise required them to be circumcised on the 8th day.
Okay. And again, that was under the old covenant. We want to encourage those who have not looked at the Bible study on Am I a Christian? And then the Bible study on the physical circumcision that we just had last week to go over that. It'll make this third Bible study a lot clearer. We are at our 10th slide. We cut it down to 18 today just so we can make sure that we spent enough time on explaining this information. So for those that arrive a little late, it's very important that you go back and look at the first 30 minutes of the Bible study. Who was the blessed seed of Isaac? The promised seed went from Abraham unto Isaac, and from Isaac it was extended unto Jacob. In Jacob's dream, the same thing was emphasized with respect to Jacob and his descendants. And if we look at Genesis, you want to take that, Elder, 28?
Yeah, Genesis 28, 1 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
And Isaac called Jacob. Now, we know that Isaac, it was extended to Isaac, but now look at what Isaac is doing. Isaac called Jacob and blessed him, and charged him, and said unto him, "Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan." He was being even specific about who he could marry. "Arise, go to Pandanaram, to the house of Beyth-el, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother." And listen to this part carefully. "And El Almighty bless thee, and make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and give thee the blessing of Abraham." Okay? To thee, and to thy seed with thee. So Isaac is saying that I'm taking this blessing that came from my father Abraham and was extended to me, and I'm going to extend it to Jacob. Okay? That thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which El gave unto Abraham. And the land was part of that promise. So that's why this was extended to Jacob. And also, go ahead, read that one.
No, okay. "And behold, the Jehovah stood above it and said, I am the Jehovah El of Abraham, thy father, and the El of Isaac, the land whereon thou liest. To thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed."
That's all right. And I want us to start looking for this when we're reading the Bible. Here, the Bible is telling us that that I am the Jehovah excuse me, Elohim of Abraham, thy father, and the God of Isaac. Later on, as you continue to read the Bible, it will not just say the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. It adds to that the God of Jacob. And there's the reason for that, because that promise was extended through Jacob as well. So we go from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And the Bible is being specific, because if you had more than one child and one of the children didn't keep those commandments, then that promise wasn't to that particular child, but only to those that will walk and be perfect and keep the commandments.
Okay. And as we get ready to get into this DNA change, we can see that there was information. You know, we talked about keeping the covenant, keeping the commandments. We see that it went from Abraham. Abraham had some information, and it came down to Isaac. From Isaac to Jacob. And then we see from Jacob, what do we say? Early on, we talked about the children of Yisra'el. We showed all the promises that were given to the children of Yisra'el. So when we get further down, we're going to see that there was a ton of information, things that Elder said that you have to do to become the promised seed of Abraham. Okay, and we're going to get ready to get into that in just a second here. As we talked about who was the blessed seed of Jacob, the passage that we're going to show below show that the blessed seed of promise, which came through the loins of Jacob, were the 12 patriarchs. These children of Jacob, later named Yisrael, became that great nation which El promised to make of Abraham. And in Acts, the 7th chapter, verse 8, it says, and he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begat Isaac and circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. So, Elder, what we've gotten so far, we haven't moved into the DNA section yet, but what we've gotten so far is that there is something that came from Abraham, from Isaac, and from Jacob, and then to the 12 patriarchs. That's going to help us with understanding this DNA and what do we need for this. We talk about this gene manipulation, what we need for this particular change.
That's all right. Now, what we want to pay careful attention to as we move on is that El is doing something to the genetic makeup. When we talk about DNA, we're talking about the genetic makeup of an individual. And so we need to understand what genes are. Okay, so, but the Bible is clear with the lineage from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And here it also lets us know that Jacob had, 12 sons? Jacob had more than just 12 children, but we're talking about the 12 patriarchs. And so the promise was extended through them. Now, there are many people that can trace their heritage back to Abraham. But is that important? It's not if you don't keep the commandments.
Right.
There are many people that came through the line of Abraham, but they don't keep the commandments. And the promise, therefore, is not to you. Right. Today, we got many Christian ministers that will tell you, I'll pray a prayer for you, and we believe you got saved. You can believe I got saved all you want. Okay? The problem is, what did the Bible require? It required Abraham to walk perfect. He said, I'm going to extend this to your seed. And the important thing is that they must walk perfect before me as well. Now, that means you got to walk in upright. As you learn the commandments, you keep the commandments. You can't keep something you don't know. So you have to learn it. And as you learn it, you know the Bible said, thou shalt not steal. Stops the stealing. And when we get to the DNA, what we're going to find out is that El has done something to manipulate, under the new covenant, to manipulate the seed of his people. And the Bible, I don't want to jump ahead, but I want to give this a little bit. I'm a little bit excited here.
Okay.
Where he said that the seed remained in them, and they cannot sin. Why? Because the seed remains in them. And the point is that El, if man can deal with DNA and he can take certain fruits and mix them up and cause to get new fruit, what about El? El manipulated the DNA of those who will keep his commandments. You don't have to worry about, I can't help but sin. No, if you walk upright and you do all you know how to do, and your heart is right, he will fix it, and he will help you to keep his commandments, and pretty soon you won't break his commandments at all.
That's when you true Yisra'el. You know, Elder, you brought something to my remembrance, and I'm going to quote it. And I know I'm not going to fully quote it, but remember in the Bible where it was some of the people of Israel, of Yisrael, and it says Abraham is our father, and we have never been in bondage.
Yes. The
said,
8th chapter of John.
Yes, he said, well, if Abraham is your father, you wouldn't seek to kill me. And
right.
He goes on to say, well, I know who your father is. And he said, the devil. So it doesn't matter that you were born. Now, they were quoting, and they were saying that we are of the seed of Abraham. They said that. I'm a physical Hebrew or a physical Jew born in the land. I know my lineage, and they had to know it through records because all these years later, you know. But the point is, just because they were born, El didn't accept them as the promised seed. Okay, so let's look at this DNA coming up. We got a few more. Did the promise to make a great nation of Abraham, Elder, did that ever occur?
It certainly did. Now, we again want to emphasize that many great nations were produced from the seed of Abraham. The point that you have to get is that every great nation did not qualify you as that great nation that was the seed of promise. So Ishmael, the Bible said, he would become a great nation. As a matter of fact, guess what? There's so many parallels. Ishmael had 12 princes himself.
Yes.
For Abraham was the father of many nations. And Sarah, the Bible says, was the mother of nations. So what's important to note is that the promise was extended through Isaac. Jacob and his descendants, what they did was they went down to Egypt. And they went down there as a group of about 70 people. You'll find that in Genesis, the 46th chapter, and verse 27. But when they left as a mighty host. And they were down there a number of years, many, many years. And so we look at the Genesis 17. It says, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. He's speaking to Abram or Abraham. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. Why? For a father of many nations have I made thee. And El said unto Abraham, as for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. See, the Bible is being very specific. Give thee a son. I'm not talking about everybody that came from your loins. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. So as a result of their union, there were kings that came from there. Many kings.
Okay.
And in Genesis 46, verse 3 and 4, and he said, I am El, the El of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt. And this is where I was showing you that they went down to Egypt, became a great nation. For I will there, where is he talking about? Down in Egypt. For I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hands upon thy head. So he's talking to Jacob. And one of Jacob's sons was Joseph. And they went down in Egypt, and they became a great nation.
Beautiful. Didn't El make a great nation? I think we talked a little bit about this of Ishmael. Now, let's kind of discuss the difference between a great nation and a blessed nation, because a lot of people read the Bible verse about Ishmael, and they get their wires mixed as far as what a great nation and a blessed nation is. But did he make a great nation of Ishmael?
Well, and as we read prior to this, yes, he certainly did. And not only did El make a great nation of Ishmael, 12 princes were begotten by Ishmael. But we cannot allow ourselves to be deceived. Ishmael was not the promised seed. And if we look at Genesis 17, 20 and 21, and as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. So Abraham prayed. So El honored his prayer, but he just didn't give him what he wanted. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. So the Bible is clear on that promised seed, the line of that promised seed. Now, so when we talk about a great nation, we're talking about memorable nations. When you talk about Ishmael and you talk about the nation that came from him, there are many kingdoms that are established through the Arabs, okay, the descendants of Ishmael. There are also, you'll find for Yisrael, but the point is that Isaac was the seed through which that promise was extended. It was not extended to every individual that was the seed of Abraham. And this is what the problem that I have with many other groups. There are many black as well as Caucasian groups that say I'm the seed. And they are boasting on the fact that they are the natural seed of Abraham. That's nothing to boast about.
No, not at all.
Not when it comes to the promises. So the promise was made to those who were natural descendants, but who kept the commandments. And El said, I'll be your El, and you will be my people.
Okay. And we see that those people who, even when Moses brought them out of the land of Egypt, were they called the children of Yisra'el? Is that who Moses brought out of the land of Egypt? Sure. When he got out of the land of Egypt, did all of them obey what Moses said? He was being directed and guided from El. And all of them didn't obey or abide by what Moses was saying.
That's all right.
El destroyed them. Okay? Then, as I said before in John the 3rd chapter, I believe it was, that Nicodemus said that he was born a Jew. But that wasn't good enough. Christ said that you have to be born again. Okay, so we're talking about this physical circumcision under the new covenant, in which he was going to write his law in your inward parts. What was so important about the promised seed as it relates to circumcision, Elder?
Well, just what you were just mentioning, that you must be born again. It is not enough for you to be born of the natural seed of Abraham. You must be born of the Spirit. I believe with the same story with Nicodemus, he said, well, how can I be born again? Can a man that is old enter the second time into his mother's womb? I mean, right. Tell me, how can I do this?
Right.
I'm up in age. So the story as it goes, and this is related, as I said before, to the circumcision, is that they were born again also by way of the circumcision, where El would write his law in your heart. He would seal you. Now, so it says, under the old and new covenants of circumcision, El, basically, he has always desired that the sign of the covenant would be a true reflection of what was in the heart of man. Even when he gave the old covenant, when it was written in man's flesh, he wanted that to be a sign. And guess what? There were many people that lived right. Abraham was one. Moses was another. Noah was another. There were many people that lived right under the old covenant, according to the commandments.
Right.
But when they broke, there were many that broke that covenant, the fathers. El made a new covenant. That's where Jeremiah 31:31 came in at. And by that new covenant, he said, I'm going to write my law in your inward part. So he never did away with the law. He just made a new agreement so you could keep the same law.
Right.
So via the circumcision of the heart and the inward parts, the act of writing his law within the flesh of man's innermost being more accurately depicted the works of the law written in their hearts. Therefore, walking before El, perfect, like Abraham did, was how El showed a change in the DNA of all true believers. Now, you want to see a miracle? Mark a man or woman that will walk upright and keep the commandments and won't sway to the left or to the right. Now you got a man or a woman. In Romans, the 4th chapter, verses 11 and 12, it talks about Abraham and how this was reckoned unto Abraham. How was it being reckoned when he was in circumcision or in uncircumcision? Well, when we say circumcision, we're saying something, and when we say uncircumcision, we're saying something. Uncircumcision shows that Abraham was a Gentile when he first accepted El, when he first believed. He wasn't circumcised. That's why he got circumcised later. And the writer here says, not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. That's how it was reckoned. And he, referring to Abraham, received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith, which he had yet being uncircumcision. Even while he was a Gentile, he grabbed hold of the faith, and he was counted righteous. And that's why he became our father, the father of many nations, and the father of the faithful, that he might be the father of all them that believe. And we keep talking in these saints and talking about the New Testament. The faith existed in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Abraham walked by faith.
Right.
You have to walk by faith. Stop making it like as if faith is a New Testament phenomenon. It existed in the Old Testament, though they be not circumcised. And look, you're going to run across biblical verses where it says circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing. You have to know what the Bible means, because these are verses that will literally screw your mind up. But what the Bible is trying to get you to see is that the important thing is not necessarily the circumcision under the old covenant, but it's the new creature that results from what? Circumcision under the new covenant. Okay, let me just finish this up. Let me go down further. And the father of circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision. So by being faithful, he became the father of those that were circumcised and the father of those that were not circumcised. That's essentially what that verse is saying. And in Colossians 2:11, in whom also ye are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands. Man's not going to do this circumcising. In putting off the body of sin, you got to stop sinning if you're going to partake in the new covenant approach to circumcision of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, which is Mashiach.
Beautiful. We're doing pretty good on time. We have about I think we have 3 more slides, so we're doing really well on time. How does circumcision under the new covenant and the spirit affect the DNA? So now we're talking about this circumcision under the new covenant. As you stated before, Abraham had not been physically circumcised, but was his heart right? When we talk about this new covenant, or El writing his law in your inwardmost parts, we say Job walked perfect, Noah. There was a lot of people who were circumcised, and I don't want to get confusing, under this new covenant before it actually, before the prophecy was even given. Right. That their heart was right, that they were keeping all the commandments. And this is what El desired for us to do when we see Jeremiah talk about it in Jeremiah 31:31. They had the law written in their heart. Okay? And so under that, they were part of this new covenant before it even actually was given to the children of Yisra'el. But Elder, how does circumcision under the new covenant and the spirit affect the DNA?
Well, I want to make a statement, then I want to sort of qualify the statement because I don't want people to run away with it. Circumcision under the new covenant, and notice it says, and the spirit affects the DNA. It is the spirit of El that actually affects the DNA of man. Now, although this thing is done in the spirit, I don't want anybody to get confused and try to keep it in the spirit, because that, in other words, I believe by faith, so I'm circumcised, and I've done everything I need to do. That's not what I'm saying. Now, like keeping any other commandment of AL, continually practicing righteousness leads to perfection. The spirit of AL brought about a change in the DNA of those who walk before AL perfect. So in the Old Testament, when they walked perfect before him, AL, through the Spirit, did something to their DNA, and they were able to walk right. Well, first of all, they had a desire to do it. Okay, they were keeping his commandments, but AL actually did something to their DNA, to their genetic structure, so that they could continue to walk upright, because it was in their heart to do right in the first place. Don't you know that AL knows your heart? So throughout biblical history, when the Ruach came upon man, his nature underwent a unique change. And this verse shows exactly what I'm talking about. In 1 Samuel 10:6, this is the Old Testament, saints. And the Spirit of the Jehovah will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. There was something about the personality, about this individual, that made him another man. Well, in other words, one that would not sin, that would walk upright and keep his commandments. Now, there's a teaching out here in the world, once saved, always saved. You can throw that in the garbage, because, see, some people they refuse to live right. Mm-hmm. There is such a thing as backsliding, okay? But the world is going to tell you, well, I just prayed the prayer of faith over you, and we believe that you are saved, and you are saved from your sin, and you'll be received into the kingdom of heaven. Hogwash. Galatians 6:15. For in Mashiach Yasha, neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision. So, I mean, is it really the circumcision that's availing anything, or is it the uncircumcision? The Bible said, but a new creature. What AL wants is for man to change his ways and walk upright. And the important thing is the new creature. So, to those that have the problem saying, oh, I'm not a Jew, how could this pertain to me? Romans explains that for he is not a Jew, which is one outward, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh.
That's the old covenant.
So that's on the old covenant. This circumcision here, we're not referring to that outward circumcision, because this new under the new covenant, it was going to be on the inward parts of man, so it'll conceal you. But he is a Jew. You want to know what makes you a Jew? Which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of AL. So if you love AL like you said, you would find yourself keeping his commandments, not giving him lip service, say, I love you, and I love you, and I got your commandments in my heart. Finally, in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, we're drawing a conclusion here. If any man be in Mashiach, that is Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. What's some of these old things? Sin. Behold, all things are new. So the New Testament is in full agreement with the Old Testament, that you become a new creature. Here it just said another man. So being filled with the Spirit, having the new covenant, is not a New Testament phenomenon. It existed in the Old Testament, but those ministers couldn't explain it to you.
Sure.
They couldn't see it, but it's there.
And we talked about a lot about Romans, the 2nd chapter, last week, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. And now, if we look at this Bible verse, and we connect it with Jeremiah 31:31, that he was going to write his law in your inwardmost part, that he was going to put his law, he was going to give you a new heart. We remember talking about that last week? Well, this means that those things from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, these teachings that he gave, these commandments, that when you keep these, then he has circumcised your heart. And now you're going to become a new creature. So as you said, Elder, there are some things that you must do in order to have your inward parts, for him to put the law in your inward parts, in order for him to circumcise your heart. Then you become a new creature. So there's going to be a change in your structure, in your DNA, because now you're sealed, as you said, you're kept. And we're going to see some outward appearances, some things that you will be able to physically observe. And we're going to go on that when we talk about this genotype and phenotype here in a second. For those, when you have some extra time, make sure you look at Acts, the 2nd chapter, verse 1 through 4, Mark, the 16th chapter, verse 17, and John, the 14th chapter, verse 26. Well, 2 more slides left. Elder, this genotype and phenotype. Let me first describe what genotype and phenotype means, and we're going to talk about how this relates to our subject tonight. Genotype is the set of genes responsible for a particular trait. So when we talk about him writing the law in your inward parts, when we talk about circumcising your heart, that's part of your genes. We can't see that. But the phenotype is the physical expression of that trait. So when this genotype is being worked on, then it's going to change something on your outward appearance. And I'm not saying necessarily to look. People call themselves Christians all day, but can you look at a person and tell they're Christian? No. It's something on the inside that changes that's going to affect your behavior on the outside. So it's important that we understand those two. This is biology, and we can understand this related to the Bible as it talks about giving us a new heart. And we talked about it last week, Elder. Elder, let's talk a little bit about the phenotype first, and then we have some Bible verses to go along with this.
An organism's phenotype is all of its observable characteristics. For example, look at that picture below. You can see the hair on the individual. Look at it. It's rather straight. That is an observable characteristic, a physical characteristic. If you could look at their eyes, you'll see they're black. Look at the nose, a distinctive nose. Look at the skin color. That is that shows the phenotype, a physical trait, a physical characteristic. So the phenotype, which are influenced both by its genotype. Now, we want to make sure you get it clear that the genotype, what's on the inside, is going to affect what's on the outside. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there will be something that you see. But you say, well, how do you see when a person is born of El? The Bible says, he that is born of El, whosoever is born of El, does not commit sin, for the seed remaineth in him. Well, you can observe that individual is walking upright according to commandments when you see them. When they have a occasion where they could break the commandments, they don't. That you can observe, okay? But the actual thing that's taking place, the genotype, is holiness is in that individual, and it's done through the Spirit. So when we talk about the phenotype, we're only talking about what's on the outside that you can see. And now it's influenced by the genotype and by the environment as well. So, for example, a lot of people stay out in the sun and they get darker and darker. Genotype is simply the information within the gene. Where does that phenotype come from? It starts in the gene as a genotype. Okay, it's the genetic makeup of a specific organism. Genotypes can only be determined by biological tests. You can't observe them. I can't look at you and tell you what your genotype is. I can only tell you your phenotype because it manifests itself physically. Genotype is an inherited trait and hereditary information passed by the parents who are the ones that help determine the genotype. Now, but El is responsible for making man. So El can manipulate the genotype. He can manipulate your seed. You know that there are some people that are just fair-natured. They don't fight. They try to keep the peace. And this is just down in them. And there are a number of things that's in them that you'll see expressed on the outside. They're not all the time frowning, poking out their mouth, mad at the world. These things can be observed in that individual. But holiness is what El has always desired to put into man. And that trait can be observed in the keeping of his commandments.
Sure.
And so when we talk about the phenotype and genotype, it's very important for you to know that and to even look more in depth at what they are.
Right, and that's just like you see bipolar. When people are bipolar, it's something on the inside. It's something in their genes. But guess what? What's in their genes is an expression. It's expressed on the outside. So when they flip off and start throwing chairs and stuff, at you, and they happy and laughing one day, and then they crying and, cutting themselves the next day, it's something on the inside. But it is affecting their outer appearance. Now, as we talked about, we're going to close out. We have one slide left. As we talk about the genotype and phenotype, I want you to go back and reflect on the Bible verses. And you may not have reflected on them enough. You may not have fully looked at the Bible study on Am I a Christian? You may not fully looked at the Bible study that talks about physical circumcision. But let's think about this now. Remember we just read the Bible, it's not outwardly that one is a Jew, but inwardly? Okay? Remember that we talked about the heart being circumcised? Well, now start thinking about the Bible verses where it says salvation belongs to the Jew. Think about the Bible verse that says all of Israel shall be saved. And guess what? Salvation is only for the Jew. But the way the world defines Jew and the way the Bible defines Jew is two different things. We talk about the Jew, we're talking about the person whose heart is circumcised, who El has written his law in the inwardmost parts. Then you are a Jew, according to the Bible. So now, if you explain that, which is, I don't think you can explain that in 5 minutes witnessing to a person, but then a person can say, oh, okay, now I see why salvation is of the Jew. Because the Jew is the one who was born again. That's the one who has the spirit of El. Okay, so this is how the phenotype and genotype relates. As we go on, Elder, we said a change of your genotype, which is the genes, will affect your phenotype, which is the physical characteristics. All right, we have a little picture here that shows a genotype is the genetic makeup of a person, and a phenotype is the physical manifestation of an inherited trait or disease. Remember I said the person that's bipolar? Some people who have diabetes, it's in their genes. Or some people who have cancer or something, and they all get breast cancer. It's something in their genes. And then it's passed on, and it's a physical, something's happened physically that you can tell that's in their genes.
And if I might just plug, that's the dietary law. This is why El gave you certain meats that you can eat, because some animals are susceptible to diseases that can not only be in that animal, but can be transferred to human beings. And we have to be careful what things we put in our mouth.
All right. Last slide here. We have a number of different Bible verses, Elder, and if we can talk a little bit about it before we close out. When the spirit of El is within you, when your genes are manipulated, look what the first chapter, verse 37 says. It says, for with El. Now, I know everybody says they have El. I have God. But unless you have that circumcision of the heart, unless you are under the new covenant, unless you are this true Jew, it says, for with El nothing shall be impossible. Now, I'm not saying my heart circumcised, so I'm going to go to the Sears Tower and jump off and see if I live. We don't want to get crazy. But we're talking about...
Don't tempt him.
Yeah, don't tempt him. If nothing is impossible... Now think about, there are things that are impossible to those that are in the world. There are things that are impossible. But it says here, for with El nothing shall be impossible. Right. So don't you know, if nothing is impossible, then something has to go on with your genes that change you to become a new creature if nothing is impossible to you. Mark the 16th chapter, verse 17 through 18. This is only for those that are circumcised. I'm talking about of the heart. This is for those that are circumcised and are a true Jew according to the Bible. It says, and these signs shall follow them that believe. Now, you can say you believe, but until you fall under that new covenant, until you follow in all of his ways, you're not this kind of believer. It says, in my name shall they cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. And they shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. I want to concentrate on if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. Now, if it says any deadly thing, that means if you drink it, it's supposed to kill you. But here, it says it shall not hurt them. So don't you know that something is going on in your body, that if you drink something deadly, the Bible said it was deadly, that it wouldn't hurt you? This is your DNA being changed. And lastly, Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, verse 2 says, for length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Now, the Bible promises the saint at least 120 years. And this is in the Bible. And it says for the sinner, what is it, 70?
10.
And 10. And by good grace, you may get 70. So now we see, Elder, that this manipulation of your DNA, not only do you become a true Jew, but there are some advantages physically that you'll receive. So anything, Elder, before we go to our questions and answers?
I mean, so basically when we talk about verses where it says, therefore all Yisrael shall be saved, of course it's talking about the true Jew, those that have entered under the new covenant, who walk according to his commandments. Okay, when we read verses like this, say, if you drink any deadly thing. Now, of course, it's not talking about you going and tempting else, saying, okay, I'm going to take a jug of alcohol and drink it. You know, there are some religious people who take deadly serpents and let them bite them in their sanctuaries.
Mm-hmm.
Bible wasn't talking about that, but some people would just take things out of context. But there are many things that if you take it by accident, and it's supposed to kill you, if you walk upright according to the command, you got to believe the Bible. If you keep his commandments and do the things he said, it won't harm you. It says that when you're sick, you're going to have to live right when you're sick. You can lay hands on, come on now, and you shall recover.
All right.
It didn't say you might recover. They shall recover. So that AL has manipulated the DNA of his holy people. And we can walk upright. Stop telling yourself I can't live right. Stop telling you there's too many commandments, I can't keep them. Learn one every day. And keep them as you learn them.
Excellent. All right. Boy, we cut down to 18. I think we're still at 10 minutes after 9. So we try to get done in an hour, but that's okay. We went a little bit over. We're going to open it up for questions. If you have any questions, *6 on your phone or *6 on your keypad. We want to encourage you again to make sure that you go back and look at the Bible study on Am I a Christian, which was 2 weeks ago in the Bible study that talks about the physical circumcision and the circumcision of the heart. That was a wonderful lesson, and this is the third part. We have one more that we're going to have next week. That talks about faith and how faith plays a part in changing your DNA. So if anyone has any questions or any comments, they can hit *6 on their phone, *6 on their keypad. If you just want to type a question in the chat room, we can see if we can see that. We're going to keep it open for about 2 or 3 more minutes while we wait for any questions. But what should people take out of today, Elder, while we wait for questions? Anything that we want to really focus on that people should take away from the Bible study?
Well, I think one thing that we need to take is that there's an advantage. There is a blessing in living right, because El honors it, and El watches over his people. And if you live right, even though the world may treat you wrong, people may come have a vendetta against you, if you walk upright and if you keep his commandment, El promises to protect you and to keep you. He shall keep them in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on him.
Okay. And I want to just emphasize before we close out that the Bible Go back and read it. The covenants, the promise, salvation. When the sky crack open, he said, I'm coming back for Yisra'el. He says that I'm coming back for the true Jew. And this is how we become Yisra'el. This is how we become the true Jew. That our hearts are circumcised. We keep his laws, his statutes, and commandments. Now, a lot of people say they're keeping them. That's a whole other story. But there is a right way to keep the Sabbath and the wrong way. There is a right way to keep Passover. And so it's more technical than people may lay it out to be. But the point is that we have to walk in righteousness. There are a lot of people who are out here, Hebrew Israelites, Jews, Orthodox, who say they live in right, who say that they are the chosen people. But it's kind of funny how out of the thousands of them, they all have different doctrines. So it's a difficult time for us to get back. But the point is, this is how we become part of God's chosen people. If we live right and we uphold his law, statutes, and his commandments. So we don't have any questions. We want to thank those, Yisra'el 12, first time joining us.
That's all right.
Our brother from Indiana and those from Chicago. Our brother I see here from Canada. Our mother Aim Ruth here from Chicago. We want to thank all those that are in Wisconsin for joining us. On tonight, we are going to have our Bible studies uploaded on our YouTube channel, as well as our website tonight at www.tvbeyth-el.net. If you have any questions that we didn't answer, for those that will be watching these broadcasts in the future, if you have any questions, send those questions to us at BibleStudy@Beyth-el.net, and we'll make sure we check that mailbox every day. We'll make sure to get back with you. We definitely would love for you to join us, become a member of Beyth-el Temple and College. Visit our website, www.tvbeyth-el.net, where you can enjoy many of the benefits of being physically here with us from the comfort of your home. Members receive our online courses on many of the subjects that we talk about, that we've talked about tonight and over the past weeks. Access to our closed circuit TV that Elder Erie and I are working on, and access to weekly TV and audio seminars. You know I'm reachable, and so if anybody needs someone to talk to personally for personal support, whether you're on the West Coast, East Coast, out the country, most of you know how to reach me. We're here to support you. And so we want to thank all of you all for joining us on tonight. We're going to be back here next Wednesday, 8 p.m. sharp. Be here for the objectives. A lot of people are missing the objectives and, you know, missing a lot of the important groundwork that we lay out in the first few minutes of the Bible study. So we ask that you have a blessed Sabbath, and we hope to see you again next Wednesday.
Thank you for tuning in. Shalom.